10 years of grueling combat at Troy ends with the city burning to the ground. In the Greek tradition, the men who fought there, figures like Achilles and Ajax, embodied the classic hero archetype. They achieved glory and won battles through extraordinary physical strength. But the man who actually ended the siege didn't do it with a sword. He used a giant wooden horse. Odysseus, the king of Ithaca, operated differently. Instead of relying on brute force, his primary weapon was his cunning intelligence. Defeating Troy was only the prologue. Now he has to get his men across the Aegean Sea to their home. That voyage turns into 10 agonizing years, navigating a chaotic ocean populated by hostile deities and monsters. Against these odds, brute force offers little advantage. You cannot outmuscle a whirlpool or intimidate a god with a sword. And the greatest threat to his survival actually comes from within. Despite his tactical brilliance, Odysseus is plagued by a massive ego. He is impulsive, fiercely stubborn, and driven by an insatiable thirst for personal glory. The 10-year journey functions as a psychological crucible. Every island and every monster forces Odysseus to decide if his intellect can finally master his own destructive ego. The cracks in his leadership show almost immediately. First, his crew sacks the city of the Cicones, refusing to retreat until their greed cost them several lives. Days later, they land on the island of the Lotus Eaters. The men gorge on intoxicating flowers that erase all memory of their homes, forcing Odysseus to physically drag them back to the ships and tie them to the rowing benches. His intellect shines through again when they are trapped in a cave by the giant Cyclops Polyphemus. Odysseus gets the monster drunk and blinds him with a burning stake. When the Cyclops asks for his attacker's name, Odysseus lies and says he is called Nobody. As the monster screams that nobody is blinding him, the other Cyclopes ignore the noise, allowing the Greeks to sneak away. Tactical victory is achieved, but as the ship pulls away, Odysseus cannot resist the urge to claim credit. His ego takes over, and he recklessly shouts his real name back at the bleeding giant. That single boast hands Polyphemus exactly the information he needs. The Cyclops prays to his father, the sea god Poseidon, asking him to exact revenge on the king of Ithaca. Poseidon's curse quickly exploits the crew's worst impulses. The god of the winds, Aeolus, gives Odysseus a leather sack containing every unfavorable wind, ensuring a safe trip. But with the shores of Ithaca practically in sight, an exhausted Odysseus falls asleep. His men, convinced the bag is secretly filled with gold, tear it open. The trapped winds violently blast the ship entirely off course. That detour lands the fleet on an island inhabited by the Laestrygonians, a race of giant cannibals. They hurl boulders at the trapped fleet, smashing the hulls and eating the sailors. Out of a dozen ships, only Odysseus's lone vessel escapes. The ocean is perilous, but the true source of this devastation is human error. A lack of restraint, coupled with an unchecked desire for spoils and glory, turns a straightforward return trip into a lethal trap. With his mortal army decimated, Odysseus has to rely on supernatural strategy. When the witch goddess Circe turns half his remaining crew into pigs, he consumes a magical herb called Molly to resist her spells, eventually forcing her to return his men to their human forms. Circe then sends him to the edge of the world to consult the dead prophet Tiresias.
Descending into Hades, Odysseus faces the ghosts of his fallen comrades and his own mother, confronting the terrifying reality that his journey is prophesied to end with immense suffering. Armed with warnings from the underworld, he faces the ultimate test of self-discipline at the island of the Sirens. He plugs his crew's ears with beeswax so they can row in safety, but orders them to tie him tightly to the ship's mast. He listens to the Sirens' enchanting song, exposing himself to pure, maddening desire, without the physical ability to yield to it. The hardest test is yet to come. To continue home, the ship must navigate a narrow strait flanked by two immortal threats. On one side is Charybdis, a whirlpool that will suck the vessel into the abyss. On the other is Scylla, a six-headed beast. Circe advised him to flee, but his stubbornness pushes him onward. Pitting mortal will against immortal force has a mathematical cost.
To avoid the whirlpool, he sails closer to the beast. As the ship speeds past, she snatches up 6 men, eating them alive. There is no clever trick to outwit Scylla. Odysseus is forced to make an agonizing moral compromise, trading the lives of his crew to keep the ship afloat. It illustrates the severe limits of human authority when confronted with the wrath of the gods. The final fracture happens on the island of Thrinacia. Both Tiresias and Circe explicitly warned Odysseus that his crew must not harm the sacred cattle of the sun god, Helios. But stranded and starving, the men ignore their leader's orders and slaughter the livestock. Retribution is absolute. Zeus conjures a massive storm that obliterates the lone surviving vessel, shattering the hull into splinters and drowning the mutinous crew. Odysseus washes ashore on the island of Ogygia, utterly alone. There, the nymph Calypso takes him captive, medicating him with amnesia-inducing lotus flowers to keep him docile. He has lost his army, his fleet, and his tactical leverage. Pinned down by divine will, his survival now hinges entirely on his own internal resilience. Years later, after Hermes finally secures his release, Odysseus washes up in Scheria. He recounts his chronological tale to the Phaeacians, publicly processing the decade-long sequence of failures and losses that stripped away his former identity. The Phaeacians ferry him to Ithaca, where his palace has been overrun by violent suitors trying to steal his wife and his throne. Instead of rushing in with a sword, Odysseus adopts the ultimate form of cunning. He suppresses his royal identity and disguises himself as a frail, elderly beggar in his own grand hall. He endures their insults and physical abuse without breaking character. This requires a level of extreme patience and restraint that the younger Odysseus, the man who screamed his name at a Cyclops, never possessed. He watches, he calculates, and he waits. The trap springs when his wife Penelope challenges the suitors to string Odysseus's old hunting bow and shoot an arrow through a dozen axe heads. The suitors fail. The beggar asks for a turn, easily strings the heavy weapon, makes the shot, and then turns the bow on the suitors, executing a cold, flawlessly calculated revenge to reclaim his kingdom. Odysseus remains a foundational figure in Western literature because his struggles are so distinctly human. He survives the most hostile world imaginable by first conquering the flaws in his own mind.